Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of This is Leadership Podcast, your intersection between growth and leadership. And this morning here in North Bay, Ontario, Canada, I was talking with Jed, and it's crappy weather. You know, it's supposed to be spring, but we've got some sleet going on. We've got some freezing rain, but it's all good because inside I've got Jed Stefanowicz, and I got that
Perfect.
right on. I've got that cue that you gave me before, so I make sure to pronounce your name right. So, Jed, it's great to have you here. So, Jed is a digital learning coach in Walpole, Massachusetts. Jed provides job embedded professional development and instructional coaching for academic technology. Through conferences, workshops, and coaching, Jed aims to engage and build staff and student digital learning capacity, keeping the focus on practice over product. As a 25-year elementary educator, speaker, blogger, and former Massachusetts Tech Plus policy fellow, Jed shares his passion for effective tech integration to transform teaching and learning, creating engaging and equitable digital learning environments and experiences that activate, innovate, and motivate. I love that. Activate, innovate, and motivate digital learning. He is also the author of two books that we'll touch on today. So Take Aim at Digital Learning, Activate, Innovate, Motivate, of course, and Impact to Influence. And he's also got a blog site. We'll talk about all that. So Jed, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for being on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I apologize for it sounds like your weather's crappier than mine. The storm system moving across North America is getting both of us this morning, but
Yeah,
but here we are. We're under roofs and we're in good shape.
exactly. And it's to be expected, living in Northern Ontario in Canada. Sometimes it snows, sometimes it doesn't. Thankfully it doesn't snow usually in July, August. But a
Yeah.
lot of people, Jed, think that automatically because you're in Canada you get a lot of snow, and it's actually not the case. So we've got some communities up north that get a heck of a lot more than us. But you were saying that you're going to a ball game this afternoon, and like I said, hopefully there's going to be no sleet and freezing rain at your end, so that you
Well,
maybe a
there
little bit of rain, but hopefully you'll be able to enjoy that game.
there will be rain, but I'll be under the roof. Thank goodness. It's funny. Our common friend Brian Espinal.
Yes.
Everyone, you're right. Everyone thinks that you're in snowy tundra Canada. He's more southerly in latitude than I am in the Boston area,
Well, there
which
you
is
go.
it's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good mini geography lesson to kick off the
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. And he's actually maybe a few hours south of us. So, just for the listeners to situate, like North Bay, Ontario is roughly, it's about a 3.5 hour drive north of Toronto. So if,
Okay.
most people know Toronto, so it'll give you a little bit of an idea of I've said this often in podcast episodes, Jed. We're like the southern Northern Ontario North Bay, because we're actually situated, like geographically, we're situated pretty much well in the middle of like the three biggest centers in Ontario, which would be Sudbury, which I spoke to you because my son goes to school there. So that's a big northern mining city, Sudbury. But then out east, we've got Ottawa, the big city of Ottawa, which is the capital. And then we've got Toronto just north. So, and we're like pretty much well smack down and right in the middle. So it's a great place to live, though, because you're not far from all the action and whatnot, but we do get the snow. So it is what it is.
It is what it is. When I find myself there, I'll definitely look you up. I'm just outside the Boston area, a little bit easier to find on a map, and I think people know where
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah, exactly. So, Jed, I know that I spoke a little bit of reading off your bio. So, how about you just maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself, your family, so that our
Yeah, sure
listeners can
thing.
get to know you a little bit more.
Sure. Proud husband of
Awesome.
Leslie and proud parent of Bennett, Maggie, Dory. Grown up kids, mostly out of college, mostly empty nest. But as I warned you, you never quite know what's going to happen. Uh,
uh,
yeah, I've just like you, I've been a teacher since the 1900s, and
yeah, yeah,
kids
yeah.
always like to hear that. I was just, I think, a year or so ahead of you, 95, 96,
Okay.
and I taught third grade for 20 years. And I thought that would be the classroom, that would be the job I'd have forever. And I was using a lot of technology in my classroom, trying to be an innovator, or at least being one of the early adopters, as they're
Yeah.
called. And then I kind of shifted into this role of digital learning coach, and really was just about trying to model interesting, innovative practices, tools, ideas. And that balance between the practices and the products is really where I has kind of guided my work.
Hmm.
I was across several schools, and now I'm in Walpole, Massachusetts, and I'm in one home school, one staff, one desk. And that makes a big difference because as an instructional coach, not a tech coach. There's a distinct difference
There's
between
a
the
big
two.
difference. Yeah.
Um, it's all about relationship building, and it's not. I'm not teaching and supporting tech operation. It's really about instructional. So I'm always very clear to articulate that role as this is a curriculum position. It's an instructional coaching role, and it doesn't begin or end with the product, with the tool. And it's really about teachers' instruction and their activities and their ideas. It's really not about what I want to do or even my agenda whatsoever. It's really about just helping teachers take a spark of an idea and make it come to life.
Yeah. If are you just working in the one school, or are you like at a
Yep.
district level?
One elementary, K to 5.
That is unbelievable. So what's the student population in that school?
Yeah, we have about 400 kids.
Okay.
We
Okay.
have 4 elementaries in our town, and in our town, we have one digital learning coach, DLC, at every building, and that's pretty rare
That
around us
is
too.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because usually
and
we'll see like that kind of position at a district level, and then like you were mentioning, the person would skip from school to school and
yep,
try to do the best that they could. But for each school to have one, I think that's amazing.
there's benefits to it, and then there are some limitations as well. In order to create that, the any tech support was removed from each building independently. We have
Oh.
centralized tech support, but that also means that I'm frontline tech support, which is also a tricky thing. I wrote about it in the introduction to the Take Aim book, where if a district is doing that, it's a really complicated thing to have somebody be your instructional coach, trying to develop that lens of could be leadership, but even just that lens of
Yeah.
character building or role building in the district, but also having them be your go-to bulb, projector, toner. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I put it in a sports analogy for our administrators recently, just saying that it's difficult to articulate that role of a coach when the members of the team see you and honestly need you at times as their equipment manager. And so, in your role, in your administrative role, I'm sure you're dealing with a lot of those same things. Is
Mhm.
really trying to delineate which of this is leadership, which of this is management. Is this a staff? Is this And
Yeah.
that's a complicated thing. I don't envy your position. I don't want your position. um, which I've said to most principals is, I feel like it's their job to convince you why you would want that job, but no one's succeeded yet. So I know where I belong, and I think
Yeah.
it's right here. And if I can partner with teachers, and like I said, Monday morning I'm going to be in a first grade rug with kids, and that's where I belong. But also
Absolutely.
then being able to talk to teachers, talk to administrators or teams about making ideas happen and what does it take to do that. And sometimes it just takes fresh ears. It takes a new member of a team that's been together for 20 years to just think about some of those activities that they're doing. And if they've been doing them for 20 years, chances are they're great. Chances are they're also due for something, a fresh pair of
Hmm.
eyes.
Hmm.
So it's never about invalidating the practice that's happening. It's really just about boosting that up.
Absolutely. I think it's great to have the instructional, leader inside the building. We've got some at our school board as well, but they're more districts. So we've got two. We call them techno pedagogues.
Ah,
That's
cool.
actually a term. So it's exactly what it is, but we still have, the tech teams, of course, that support the schools, but their sole responsibility is that tech integration, coaching and teaching and support for the teachers. So, and the impact has been just unbelievable. Our board has been able to develop things like, continuums and been able to define what kind of a profile, and add it actually to our student profile in terms of where we'd like them to be when it comes to their level of tech use and how comfortable they are to be able to integrate that in their lives. But when it comes to and those are the students, but with the teachers, what's great is that it's all based on curriculum and pedagogy, right? So it's not about creating a lesson and then trying to insert that piece of the digital or the technology, but it's about how can I look at the needs of the student and then just integrate the whole thing together and use it as a leverage, right? So, and we've been talking about that for a long time, Jed. Like I remember the first years, and you brought me back to that when we started talking about technology integration in our classrooms and in our schools. And I remember how it started off with, some of those teachers that were early adopters, at
Oh yeah.
lunchtime, you'd invite all the teachers,
Oh
come
yeah.
on over at lunch and we'll talk about this application and I'll show you how to use it. And we've come a long way since then.
Most of us.
Yeah.
Most of it.
Good point.
And that's the fact. Across the board, there's always going to be a spectrum. And that's, from a leadership perspective, from a coaching perspective, it's really, it's just moving everyone along at their pace, at their comfort level, which presents a tricky thing. As a coach, kind of your number one thing is to try to draw people, encourage them slightly out of their comfort zones. The fact of the matter is nobody's been in their comfort zones now for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a complicated perspective. But I want to back up a second because
Yep.
something that you said about building those portraits of a student or portrait of a graduate, I'm
Yep.
not sure what you call it, but you see it done a lot. And sometimes I feel like it's done kind of backwards.
Mm.
And what ends up happening is districts work really hard to develop that portrait of a graduate. And what it ends up being is this like receipt at the end that you have handed and saying, this is what you've done. And it's counting all the measures. The way you described it, I think, is critical because you're using it to frame instruction. You're using
Yep.
it to have ongoing instruction and really frame that thinking. So that at the end, it's not a receipt of what they've done. It's almost like uh, a license, right? This is the outcome you're hoping to see, and
That's right.
this is where they're positioned and poised to move, and this is how the students that leave your system are equipped to go next. So I think I congratulate you on that because it's I think the right perspective to bring to it.
Yeah, and it was really necessary for us because, like you said, it's not easy. Everybody's starting off at a different place when it comes to integrating technology and whatnot. So, you know, the mostly what we seen throughout the years is that teachers are looking at how do I do it, right? And then you've got some of them that'll think that I'm not going to do it because it's extra work,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So,
100%.
yeah. So how do you go about, like, I'm just curious, like when you do meet, somebody like that, and you're coaching them, how do you go about to really, talking to them and making them realize that, maybe it's not extra work, and the difference between transforming, our teaching and versus, like I said before, like I described, just taking what we already built and just trying to force it in there, and then it ends up being something that wasn't a good experience or something that
Yeah.
doesn't feel natural. So how do you go about that, Jed, to when you to deal with that?
Well, I think it is extra work,
Mm-hmm.
and I think trying to convince someone that it isn't is almost feels deceptive at times because then they feel like they're either being. I think you run the risk of diluting your agenda if you don't admit that it's extra work. I think the hook is, or the trick is, work that's important to them, work that's meaningful, because then, I think that's the convincing they need. Not that it's work, but that it's work that's going to be meaningful. And what other profession wouldn't you want to grow? Wouldn't
Mm.
you look to apply that extra work? And that to me is kind of the difference between professional development and professional learning. And during COVID, especially, I mean, look at how educators took ownership of their professional learning and by necessity, because
Mm.
they had to reinvent exactly how to do what they knew how to do.
Yeah.
And maybe coursework, it may have just been learning how to use new platforms and technology. But that idea of it being personalized them and individualized as professional learning on their pace, by their selection, all those factors. And then we came back to school and it's, sometimes pretended like nothing ever happened. And we shifted back to staff meetings and schedules. And that goes for teachers as well as it goes for students.
Absolutely.
And, we see that loss of student agency. Well, we see the loss of educator agency too. And
Mm.
I think that's the part where um, it's beyond just burnout. It's not that. I think people have truly fallen out of love with the job that was their calling.
Mm.
And it's, I think, going to be a more gradual recovery than a lot of people give credit for. It's really not about learning loss. I think learning loss is a phrase for vendors
Yeah.
to try to,
I agree.
fix
It makes sense.
fix
Yeah.
gaps. Because what I think that loss is something that's way less tangible. It is that agency piece, and it's always been hard to say what agency is. But man, do we know it when we see it missing from kids who can't wait in line, can't play a game together, never been on a field trip, or teachers who were poised before the pandemic to be those early adopters, to try innovative things, and now came back and it was just all about rebuilding their classrooms, rebuilding community, which is critical. But it's, I'll be at a workshop or a conference. Literally just yesterday, this
Mhm.
happened, and someone said, I used to use so much technology. I was doing green screens. I was, going to begin a podcast, and now I don't even think about doing those things anymore. It's initiatives, it's time, but I think it's also a mindset, and it's that mindset that is not respecting the process of recovery that I think is really needed. And mindsets build skill sets. And if
Yeah.
if that is true, then we really have to spend time intentionally focusing on building those experiences for educators as well as students to build a broader digital literacy that's different from just tech integration. Um, and I'm jealous of the position you have. Would you call them robo tech heads? So, what are they called? Pedagogue?
Yeah, techno pedagogues. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It does
Yeah.
sound pretty cybernetic, I will admit,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. It's yeah. They do, but it's really what it is it's a workaround instruction, right? So they're basically they're instructional coaches. That's what they are.
yeah,
But when it
that's
comes
amazing.
to, how can I integrate and leverage technology, in the classroom? So it's all about that.
And for me, it's I always try to evolve from that technology integration piece because that is so product and tool and platform and schedule oriented to really have it be about digital learning. So I always am very aware and intentional about, because digital learning is about the learning, tech
Yeah,
integration is about the tech,
yeah.
right? And so one of the things I've built is a model in the past year or so called domains of digital learning.
Mm,
And the domains of digital learning is just three main categories: wellness, competency, creativity. Because pretty much every way we think about technology integration in schools, it falls within one of those three categories.
okay.
And wellness, beyond just digital citizenship, competency is the skills, abilities, attitudes we see in our classrooms. And then creativity, that's kind of our jam, right?
Mm,
That's
mm,
how are we capturing learning? How are we showcasing learning? But most importantly, how are we capturing every student's voice? And
yeah.
that brings an equity piece in to make sure, just like we were taught, is there a day when you go home where you didn't hear someone's voice? Now I think we can kick that up. Is there a day that you haven't captured someone's voice,
Mm.
whether it's recorded, written, their idea? Does every student in the class feel like their voice has value, their opinion is solicited, shared, honored? And it's time to move kind of beyond that bulletin board to do that, to think about how are we showcasing student thinking, learning, understanding.
Yeah. And maybe that's one of the reasons why, when you talked about, coming back from COVID and teachers saying, I used to do a lot of, green screen and whatnot, and I'm doing less now. In my conversations with school principals in my district and teachers is, maybe one of those reasons is because they put more focus on right relationship developing and rebuilding those bridges with the kids. So maybe it's more of a priority thing, right? Maybe they've put it aside a little bit more and to build that kind of, those kinds of bridges back with the kids and trying to meet their needs, because a lot of them lived so many different experiences right throughout the pandemic when you were
Yeah,
at home.
right. And
Some
teachers
weren't
saw it.
even, yeah, and some weren't even connected, right? Some of them had to, some students had to sit in their parents' cars in the school parking lot to access the school Wi-Fi, right? Because it wasn't accessible to them at home. So maybe a little bit of the shift, and like you said, that healing is going to take maybe a little bit more time. But I think for us is to make sure that we're beside them to be able to you know to uh, to develop those tools with them so that they're able to do that, but to also be there to support them and accompany them and to keep encouraging them that we're going to keep going towards that important goal of developing that digital literacy for our students and for ourselves as well. We can't
Yeah,
forget that, but how can we do it together? So for example, in our district, I talked about our techno pedagogues, and we've given a really big push in the last 2 years where we want to get rid of the silos when it comes to the services at the board level, right? When we're talking about pedagogy, we're talking about spec ed, and we're talking about technology. So we've got all the different services available. So we've really concentrated on being able to really mesh together and do some of that work together. So for example, if I'm giving a district training on in reading, for example, with the pedagogy team. Well, I'm going to make sure to go and get, somebody from the spec ed team and somebody from the tech team, and to be able to just really come together so that people can see that it's not all separate and it's not all silos, right? But we're actually trying to, the work that we're doing in the classroom is we're trying to do it all together at the same time, because it is possible to integrate it and to be able to do it in such a way that we're developing, that whole, we talked about the student profiles, like I call them profiles, but um, to make sure that we are actually touching all those elements that we want to touch, and we're not ending up just concentrating on just the one element and missing out on some other ones.
And that's true integration. And what you're talking about is integrating the leadership, integrating the thinking,
Yeah,
integrating, in all of it is centered around the student learning in the
that's
middle.
right.
You're not talking about just the tool integration. And that, I think, is a critical shift. And when you were talking about um, kids connecting from their parents' cars or
Yeah.
all those things, think of what the educator was learning about their student that we have no idea when we're back in school.
Yeah.
There was a I say it, and I wish there was a better word, but there was an intimacy to being remote where you were able to see students in their context, hear students from home. And yes, their little brothers and sisters were running around or they were logging in from their bed. But at the same time, you had a connection with a student. You were able to see them and hear them in ways that is lost when they're back in person. You don't
Yeah.
have that context of their situation. And all of that, I think, really informs a lot to the educator. And to the point of, I think you're right, that community building, and I don't mean to dismiss community building as critical, because it's absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm.
What I hope is that this this recovery, the attitude, all right, put your Chromebooks away, we're going to do, no technology, that reaction, I'm hoping it's a backswing and not a backslide,
Yeah.
right? And that's the whole thing. So how do we do it? How do we begin to build that back? That's what, so that my first book, Take Aim at
Yeah.
Digital Learning.
Yeah.
I'm glad you like the activate, innovate, motivate, because when you talk about building those teams, and I'll use my American accent to talk about pedagogy and special ed teams.
That's my French accent there. Anyways,
That's okay.
pedagogy in French, I'm programmed
Yes,
like that,
because when you bring those teams together and
Yeah.
when you talk about with a student in mind, how can you activate the content, innovate the instruction, and motivate the learner? It's not
Love it.
about the technology,
Mm.
right? And that's where everyone applies their lens. It's really not a technology book. It's really a book about instruction, and good instruction should include technology. So it's not really a manual for how to use technology. It's really just an evolution of education kind of handbook.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I really truly believe if we can activate that content, innovate the instruction, and then motivate learners, that's when you create those moments in school. And when you're delivering those trainings, at the end of the day, what you're trying to create is meaningful moments, moments that are actually meaningful, measurable,
Mm.
but also memorable, right?
Yeah.
Those are the things we remember from our first years teaching,
Absolutely.
but we also remember as students. How can we craft those moments in ways, but making sure they're also measurable, they're aligned with curriculum, and we're delivering what we need to deliver, but also bringing our craft to it. And classroom teachers, again, making those connections with the students, but also making the connections with why they got into the job in the first place.
And I think it's important a book like Take Aim at Digital Learning, it's important for us to be able to develop our framework, and our philosophy, because it's one thing to say, here's what it looks like with the kids when I'm doing it with the kids in the classroom, but how am I going to do, what am I going to do to be able to bring myself to that point as a professional, as a teacher, or as an administrator? What do I need to do to learn and to be able to provide that to my kids, right?
And people don't ask themselves that question.
Yeah.
And I think that contributes to either the burnout, the frustration, the feeling just a little bit stuck or siloed. You use the phrase, and that's true. Being siloed is not always an intentional thing. Sometimes people are stuck in those silos. And that's actually what led me to, and thank you for the segue to my second book, which is called Impact to Influence,
Mm-hmm.
which is a perfect, I mean, you could be and should be a character. So Impact to Influence. The idea of this book is I wanted to find people who have busted out of those silos.
Yeah.
People like yourself, who I would say, all right, you are a middle school chem teacher, 7th and 8th grade. What is it? Who was it? How was it that made you take that next step? and now to an admin level, you left the classroom. Or if you're inspire leadership, I mean, this podcast, the books,
Yeah.
your talks, you don't have to do those things,
No,
right?
no.
And you know, that's why I don't have a podcast, because there are way better podcasters like you who are doing it. But what I did for this book was I found 20 really inspirational leaders who have either published, they have podcasts, they're speakers, they're national teachers of the year. And I
Mm,
kind of asked them, tell me your story. What is it that went from impacting, you know, for you, 7th and 8th grade science students, to realizing that you had a voice that could be shared. And like this, I turned on Zoom and we had a 20-minute, 30-minute conversation, because everyone can do Zoom now, right? It was a
that's
real
right.
big equalizer. And in the book, you read 3 or 4 pages about someone, and then there's a QR code that goes to that interview. So it's like
That's
an
great.
embedded podcast, and it's a cool idea. And it's just something different, because I wanted people to share their stories in their own voices as to, are they risk takers? Are they rule breakers? Are they change makers? What is it about them? And it was challenging sometimes to not let people fall into their scripts
Yeah.
that, you know, they're comfortable delivering on the road. And it was not about, you're not training me. I don't need the motivation. I want to know about you. And that was a really fascinating thing. What I realized at the end of it was kind of this whole selfish journey for me to collect all these people who I found inspirational in different ways and wanted to learn from them, and then kind of share that in one collection for anyone else thinking about, am I stuck in that silo? You know, do I have something? And what I found most of the time was that there was someone along the way who either gave an opportunity, you know, things align, whether you think it's the universe, whether it's spiritual or what. But usually somewhere along the way, there is this sense that there's more I want to give or give back. And then opportunity presents itself. And then usually somebody special along the way. It's a typical hero's journey. So, and you are well on it, which is very cool to think about.
Mhm.
I know we were talking at the beginning, we're approaching retirement age. How can two people as young looking as us be thinking
No, no,
about
no,
that?
no,
But
no. We're very young, and it's more like, it's funny. I'll use the word retirement, but it's more like you're just moving on to something else, right? Because
and that's what it is,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
that's a mindset too. The
yeah,
mindset builds the skill set, and when
yeah,
you think about what might I want to do next, you build the skill set to be able to do it.
yeah.
And like you have shown, you were telling me kind of your trajectory. What you've shown is that you keep turning it around, and you're growing professionally, but you're really in a role that's supporting others to grow professionally too.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing, right? Because it's almost like having a sandbox. You're
For
able to
real,
just
yeah.
go in there and like I'm saying in that sense, but it's just it's adding value to other people, right? And just to come back to your two books, so Taking Aim at Digital Learning and Impact Influence. So for everybody that's listening, I'm going to link those up on my website. So you just need to go to inspireleadership.ca. In the podcast section, we're going to have the show notes for Jed's episode and the links so that you can go and buy the book. But what I like about the book, Jed, is Taking Aim. Like I said, it's more like and when I'm speaking about this, I'm thinking about my own, my own path, my own path that I took, developing and my leadership and coming into the realization of the importance of that and coaching and adding value to others is Taking Aim. Like I said, we'll give you a framework, right? I think that's really important, is to understand, okay, where did it come from and how do I position myself within that framework. And what I like about Impact to Influence, and this is an important part for our listeners, so it's a book about people talking about their story, right? And when I talk about the podcast, is often that the people that will download the episodes and listen and the people that will be involved are often people with the same profile as us, right? That we all,
Sure.
we're all very similar. And the trick is, and when I do share podcast episodes on Twitter and Facebook and whatnot, I'll always ask, you make sure to download and share and share. And when I say share, it's like, yeah, we can share to other people that are like us. But the trick is to bring it to somebody that isn't, on Twitter, or I'm just saying it like that's maybe not, hasn't in their path come to that realization yet of the importance of, and the joy and the energy that it can give us. So what I like about that is often for people to realize that the importance of that is to be able to relate to an experience. And when we talk about your book, Impact Influence, and we're talking about stories, if I can, for example, gift the book to a colleague of mine that I know maybe, has a bunch of potential, but I can see that if they just need a little bit of a push to tap into that energy, to tap into that world of connectiveness and to their passions. And by reading, some of the stories, often one of those will really hit home with me and I'll be able to relate to it. And sometimes that's the one spark that it takes. So that's why I really like, Jed, that format, that kind of format of the book where I'm reading stories of other people. And so for the people listening, so it's really important when we talk about, sharing podcast episodes, or we talk about a book like Impact to Influence, think about a colleague or a friend that maybe isn't involved or isn't, at that point in their journey. And, what good could come from sharing that with them? Because it's not everybody that's on Twitter, right, Jed? It's not everybody that's on Facebook. So, what if for that colleague, I meet them and I just open my computer and I say, listen, I'm going to send you this link by email, and just have a listen to this podcast episode, or here's a book that I've read, I'd love for you to read it. It's great. I think you're going to love it. But to just intentionally make that step, with some of the people that we think that could really use it, I think would make a huge difference. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that,
That is
I love the
awesome.
format, Jed. So because it could be very impactful, not just for us that we're there and we feed off that kind of storytelling, but also to, maybe some friends and colleagues that just need that little push to be able to relate and say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and discover that and bring that passion into my classroom.
That I apologize if you just got other sound in the background all of a sudden.
Nope.
On my headphones. It just went crazy. But everything you said is exactly what that book is all about. It's
Yeah.
impact and it's influence. And you realize if you have impact, there is a responsibility. Yes, it's like Spider-Man, right? But it's the influence you have, and that whole idea of sharing.
Yeah.
That's for me what this book was about, was people sharing their stories. Now, I love that idea of gifting a book to someone. Obviously, that's a really powerful idea. But you don't have to buy two. Read it and then pass it along. I
Yeah.
mean, that's or buy two. But the idea of sharing, because characters in this book, Chris Jones, Brian,
Yeah.
Frank, and these fascinating people. And then, like I said, there's Teachers of the Year, the U.S. Teacher of the Year. My sister in Vermont was the
Mm.
Vermont Teacher of the Year. But then you've also got people who don't consider themselves educators. Peter and Paul Reynolds, the authors from Massachusetts, the author of The Dot. I mean, every elementary school I know features, International Dot Day and they don't consider themselves educators, except
Yeah.
they've taught more kids than anyone else we know. There's a bonsai artist from England who,
Wow.
again, the same thing. He wouldn't consider himself an educator, but he kind of on a whim started creating these instructional videos where he just kind of talked while he was clipping and wiring and talking. And the wisdom he shares, and it's all about how, education, there should be no ownership, the democratization of information and knowledge, whether it's how to train a tree, but just the process of learning.
Yeah.
And he's got 40 million views, and his reach is insane. And, coming from very humble beginnings, I said, this is the story of impact to influence. And
Mm.
so hearing those stories, but you're right. I mean, anyone I could hand this book to, I could say, you need to listen to this story. You need to listen,
Yeah.
to someone who has moved into politics, someone who has, in Australia has a personal journey. Brett Salakis, if you don't know his story, it's a powerful story. But it's also a story that leaves you with, okay, there are levers I can reach, there are levers I can move, and that's exactly it. And so for someone who is feeling siloed, or for someone who recognizes, you know, like I said, it's usually the special someone along the way who said to you, all right, Joel, I see that, you should think about, and it could be
Yeah.
very small things. You should think about just talking at a staff meeting. Like
Absolutely.
you forget the importance of mentioning to a classroom teacher, you should just present this at a staff meeting or at a local conference. That's what started the journey for me. And people forget that influence. So,
Yeah.
you know, again, and you can be that lever for someone else, and you can act as that role to tell someone else. So I appreciate it. I mean, I feel like you're actually the first person who's really encapsulated it so well
Okay.
in terms of why I wanted to build this. And to me, it's a project, it's not a product.
Yeah.
And it's not a great publishing mindset, but it's a project that is just kind of ongoing that I wanted to put together and really share in service of teaching and learning.
Yeah, and it's a great idea. Often, as a principal, we'll hear people asking the question, how can we transform staff, or we know a few of these people that maybe can use a little bit of push. They seem down, or they don't seem as engaged, and we'll think about traditional things that we can do to try to transform that, but we don't necessarily think about sharing things like this. So it could be very powerful. So like I said, and once again, everybody that's listening out there, think about one person that you're working with in your building, or a colleague that you're working with, and send an email. Send an email with a link to a podcast episode, or go and talk to them, and bring a book and say, listen, this is a great book. I think it would be, you would really like it. So, I'd like you to read it and make that step, because that's how we help transform people. Jed, you were talking about how usually a journey starts with somebody giving us a little nudge. And for me, it was the same thing. So, we can be, that person that gives the nudge, and that's how we bring about change, and that's how we inspire. That's how we're able to impact and add value to people, right? Is by intentionally taking those steps and not just saying it. So we've got an important responsibility as leaders, right? Because everybody can be a leader. So how can we bring other people? And that's how I always see it. What leadership development, what coaching, what adding value to others, that feeling that it gives me, that wonderful feeling that fuels me to want to continue, that fueled me to want to start a podcast, a
Yes,
French
exactly.
podcast, and the English one, and then that fueled me to want to start writing my book. And that leads to connections, connecting with you, connecting with Brian, connecting with Codebreaker and X Factor, with Matthew. And it's unbelievable, the ricochets and the domino effect that can have on somebody. So for me to be able to just ignite that little spark in somebody, for them to be able to taste that, I just need you to taste it, because I know once you've tasted it, your journey will continue and will be so much better. So it's very impactful, and impact influence, the fact that you even have QR codes in there that link to people talking on a video, and I can listen to them. Like, wow, talk about, having everything in one. And I'm not just saying that. It's just, I'm actually picturing myself, if I had something to be able to give to somebody that I want them to compliment. I want it to compliment their journey, and to be
Yeah,
able to taste that, what a great resource.
well, thanks. I mean, that's one of the best reviews anyone wrote about it, was that it was like 20 mini PD sessions in one.
Yeah.
And none of them were from me.
Yep.
I really truly was the idea of collecting and sharing them in one place. And it's true, because they're all so different, and it's all learning from those journeys. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And I can't wait for you to read. And it is kind of fun to think about. You read a couple pages, and then it's all one shot session. And then
Yeah.
you're at the beach, you open it up, so
Well,
that's the idea. But
and I'm just thinking about, the work that I do with my district team, and it could be a principal as well, or it could be even teachers. Throughout the years in my schools, I've always offered book clubs, right? So let's take a book, let's study it together, and often, and other times with the principals, it's within the mastermind framework, right? But so here's a book, right? So the way I see it is, just think about this, right? If you're a school principal and you're listening to this episode, right? Or even if you're a teacher, okay? So just imagine, like, you've got this book, and you offer to everybody, let's do a book club, let's do a book study. And, you meet with the people, you read a chapter. And then at the end of that conversation, when you discuss about the chapter, how you relate to it, how it relates to your work, can you imagine everybody being able to listen and watch that video, that interview after?
it
It's,
lends itself really well
well,
to a
that's
book
what I'm
study
saying,
in that
you know?
sense, because you meet this person, it's like you've all done a PD session with this person, and then you can, as a group, say, wow, what are the takeaways? What would you learn? What would you ask? How can this person's journey inspire you? Yeah, it does lend itself very well to a leadership book study. So thanks for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, getting back to coaching, Jed, I think coaching is in my perspective, is the most powerful, approach we can use in helping and helping people transform. I was curious to know, because I know that's the type of work that you do, right? You're a
Yep.
coach. So,
Yep.
and, in working with my school principals in my district, but, in my leadership in the work that I do in leadership with Inspire Leadership Coaching as well. I always advocate the importance of, and the power of coaching, right? That approach. So, based on your experience, how important is coaching in education, in the educational field, and what has been its impact in the work that you've done so far?
It's a great question. And some of the power begins with not using the word coaching for me anyway. I always try to use the word partnership because,
I like that. Yeah.
you immediately set up a dynamic when, if I've never been a first grade teacher. So for me to, just frame a conversation with a first grade teacher as a coaching conversation immediately sets up a funky dynamic. And I was on the other end of it, early in my career. And I know how resistant I was to the idea of a coach and
Yep.
partnering. But my lens, and it's different from other coaching models. And so, for example, Jim Knight, his instructional coaching model is awesome, but it's different from the role of a digital learning coach.
Mm,
And I just view my role as a real partner to that educator, and not about just their instruction, not about their pedagogy in particular, but about their idea. And that has been a real transformational thing. So even if, it's a video recording of a lesson, I don't want to watch the recording. The classroom teacher can watch it. They set the goals for what our conversation is going to be.
okay.
And it's usually not about, you know, and not too much of a tangent, but having a student teacher, I don't know what the student teaching, college prep programs are like in Canada, but it's such a great tune up for a classroom teacher to give feedback, to
Yeah.
observe. But that is very different from a professional coaching. That is, you're really imparting and you're guiding that person. I wouldn't pretend to have expertise to tell a first grade teacher how to do
Hmm.
their first grade instruction better. What I might say is, let's start with a project. Let's start with your idea. That's what we're partnering on. That's what our resources are aligned on.
Mm,
And then through that, yes, you bring in the instructional piece and you build out the before, the during, the after. Really have it be about the project or the unit or the curriculums, outset. That way you're touching on the instructional aspect of it, the operational aspect of any
that's right.
technology. Um, but you're also bringing the creativity and hopefully focusing on wellness too. And it's really just trying to give that broader view of instructional design. And that to me it's everything. No one feels defensive about their own craft. What we're really analyzing and what we're really hoping to hone and shift and evolve and grow is their instructional design,
Yeah.
not just their instructional practice.
Yeah.
And it's a really fine line. And, you know, 6 years in, I'm still new to it. Our district is new to it. And it's hard to see it done really expertly anywhere, because anyone who's doing it really well has suddenly started writing books and,
Yeah.
holding seminars in how to do it. But I just think a fundamental mindset of what you're doing immediately opens or closes the door right in your face. So, and I'm sure from a leadership point of view, you're faced with some of those same things. Is how do you give feedback that can be constructive, feel supportive in a way that's respecting the teacher's intention, respecting their craft, their experience, their status, that, all the things that are so emotionally connected to the
Yeah.
teacher, right? It's such an emotional job, so much so that we don't observe each other.
Yeah.
I don't know about in the Ontario
No,
region,
it's
but
the same. It's the same.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's we don't observe each other, and that's probably why we also gravitate toward podcasting and or conferences or the innovators group. Like, these are our like-minded people, and you don't find them necessarily because we tend to be kind of singular in our positions in our buildings.
Yeah.
So you find those connections. Um, but to support that educator and to think from that coaching model, I really had to define it for me in a way
Yeah.
that makes sense. And it really begins and ends with, it's not about my ideas. It's not about what project I want to do. It's about helping someone not find the spark, because that's a different professional journey. It's really just articulating what's the idea and then how can I be supportive in helping bring it forward in a way they might not have otherwise, whether it's out of, you know, comfort level, skill level, experience level, whatever it is. And COVID only made it so much harder.
Yeah.
But here we are on the other side of it. So now's the time. We have a blank slate in so many ways. And if we think about it that way, rather than just a slate that's been washed away, that I think, again, mindsets build skill sets. And that mindset, I think, will build some of that skill set beginning with partnership together, because that's really critical in the journey.
Absolutely. What's been really interesting in our school district in the last well, since I've come on, is with our instructional leaders who are teachers, right, that go into the classrooms and the schools to support. We also make sure we're actually, developing our own skills and competencies as a team when it comes to mindset. For example, it's one thing to come in and work with let's say a classroom teacher, and to say we're going to start where you're at, of course, and how do you see this? But at the same time, how can we build, the capacity within this teacher, and to be able to give them the tools in return to develop a mindset where, whenever another time comes up where maybe it'd be good for me to transform or to change or to add something in my teaching, that'll be much easier for me to be open to that and to actually feel excited. So we're
Mm-hmm.
actually within our team, that leadership development work that I'm doing with them has been crucial, because they've got all the skills. Like my team is solid, rock solid when it comes to, actual teaching and curriculum and all the strategies that come with that. But I said that now let's look at how is it that we can elevate even more that impact as a coach, each one of you as a coach, where when we're coming in, we're not just talking about your teaching and pedagogy and the curriculum, but we're actually looking at being intentional on how can we develop that professional, that individual, to be able to grow as well, and to develop that mindset that, I want to become a lifelong learner, and I want to be open to these things, and I want to be curious about wanting to learn even more. So that's been a really great shift. They've been loving it. Like I said, we've been doing the masterminds with them as well, and the book studies. And right now we're reading Primal Leadership. I don't know if you know that book. That's about, emotional intelligence related to leadership and how that can impact the work that they're doing in schools. So
Excellent.
so it's been very impactful. But when it comes to coaching, that's the way that I see it. How can we really be effective with our time, that we have with those teachers or whoever it can be? It could be a principal. And how can we really develop, that whole person, not just the craft, but also the person and the mindset, right?
It's so funny how sometimes when you describe your team, it's awesome that you have a rock star team. It runs the risk sometime of building a team of people who know they're rock stars, and
Yeah.
sometimes that can get in the way of those partnerships
Yeah,
too.
I could.
Um, but you at the helm, I know that's not the case. Uh, there is a dynamic where people, it has to be non-evaluative first of all,
That's right.
or if it is evaluative, it's not of the person and their professional performance. Educators are really good at evaluating lessons, learning. It changes completely when they're feeling evaluated from a
Mm-hmm.
professional point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is a critical piece too for me, is to know that I have no evaluative or supervisory role whatsoever. So there is a safety. And there's also when you talk about, they are people who are very highly skilled in their craft. That makes a huge difference. You're not talking about people who came through IT. You're talking about people who have done the job, walked the walk, different
Yeah.
levels and different lenses,
Yeah.
but speaking the same language. And that's critical. If I didn't have 25 years of teaching behind me, it'd be a very different conversation
Mhm.
to be taken seriously, or to have credibility behind what I'm suggesting, what I'm envisioning, um, because I have the ability to say, we can make this happen. We keep it small, and you talk about capacity building. One of my colleagues, Jean Tower, she said it best. It's just keep it simple, stick to the ABCs, always build capacity, and if you can just kind of, you know, make sure your leaders, make sure your team members, make sure your admin teams just get over themselves for a minute
Mm,
keep it about the
that's great
teacher,
advice. Yeah.
keep it about the learning,
Yeah.
and keep it about capacity building for every human in the room. Sometimes it's good to just kind of get that grounding.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Jed. So listen, it's been a great conversation. For the people that are listening to us, Jed, today, if they wanted to get a hold of you, how can they go about to do that?
Sure thing. Easy to find me on Twitter at Stefanowicz135. It'll be in the show notes. And my website, jedpd.com. You can find my books. You can find links to other information. I'd love to come talk to schools or book studies, as you mentioned.
Yeah,
And you just reach out. I'd love to connect. And even if it's just you have an idea and you want to talk about that idea, that's kind of what I'm here for. Whether it's people in my building or people in Ontario, just let's talk about an idea. Let's make it happen because I think people forget how much capacity they have to begin with, and then how much capacity others have to help them along the way.
absolutely. So don't be afraid to reach out, guys. And we'll have all those links, of course, your email address, your links to your site, your website, and your books. Just head on down to inspireleadership.ca in the podcast episode. And as Jed said, it'll be in those show notes. So, Jed, I've got one last question for you, and then I'll let you
Hit it.
go go about your Saturday. So, Jed, if for the people listening to us today, if you had one wish for them, what would that wish be?
Ooh, I didn't get prepped with this
No, you
question.
didn't get prepped with this one.
uh, my wish would be to slow down, kind of find their focus, and figure it out. What do you want to do? What are you waiting for? What's in your way? And do you have the skills to move some of those obstacles or barriers? And if not, who can you reach out to? Who can help you? Find people around you who have done it. If you're feeling stuck in that silo, if you feel like you're in a classroom, but 3 years from now you want to try something else, start that journey. And if you don't know how, ask someone who's done it.
Mm,
That's what this book is all about.
absolutely. I love it. Thanks a lot, Jed. That's some great advice and a great wish for the people listening to us. So thank you so much for taking the time
Thank
to
you. What a
connecting with
great
me. You
conversation.
know,
This
I
is
had
this
seen
has
you
been
in
great.
the lounge on a Friday, I think the one
Yep.
time, but just to be able to connect and talk, it's you're a great guy, and I love the work you're doing, love the books, and I wish you the best. I wish you a great baseball game this afternoon.
Yes, let's go Red
Yeah,
Sox.
let's
And
go Red Sox. So thanks again
uh,
for being here, and I'm looking forward to sharing this episode with
uh,
everybody.
I'm very grateful. Thank you, and for all you do. Thank you for your leadership as well. And it's great to connect in person. I look forward to more partnership with
Absolutely,
you.
absolutely, Jed. Thanks a lot.
Take care.